And how did they get to the Yankees? Oh, we're going to talk about it. Game 5, what a heck of a Game 5 it was. What a series between the Guardians and Detroit. Equally matched, and it is the Cleveland Guardians moving on. And Zack, because of that, we move on. We continue doing shows. We're not going anywhere. We're going full Leo here. Not leaving. You know what that is. We've talked about this. You've seen that movie.
The show doesn't end if the season ends, does it? I'm not in on this.
In the minds of some. I think in the minds of some. They pick us back up in spring. That's fine. As long as you're here. As long as you don't forget about us over the winter. We won't forget about you.
Wait, so you mean there are some people that don't know just how weird and crazy we get in like the dead of winter when we're trying to pull topics out of our...
That's true. Some people actually like the show better when we're stuck in that mindset. We don't have to get there yet. We've got a full off season, and really how the next several weeks goes is going to determine what that off season looks like. Because the Guardians won Game 5 in dramatic fashion. I thought Game 4 was really gut-wrenching. Game 5, I can't even imagine being in the shoes of Stephen Vogt, trying to imagine how he was going to piece together the end of that game. And you knew it was going to take some, not only the main players in that bullpen, but also some guys that they haven't relied on in this series to step up, and they did. And we'll talk about all of that. But wow, what a series, dude.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin. I think I'm glad you brought up Vogt because he was the focus of my piece for The Athletic last night where, first of all, let's acknowledge, no matter how you feel about the pinch hitting, how you feel about pulling Matthew Boyd, like the decisions, that's maybe a topic for some other time. I don't know. Maybe it's today. I don't know. But it's also a footnote. And if we just think back to a year ago, Terry Francona had stepped down and we were trying to figure out, all right, what are they going to do here? Craig Counsell was a hot rumor for 5 minutes. Will Venable seemed like a logical fit before he stayed in Texas. It was a lot of like guys we had heard of who were maybe hot names or guys who you didn't know a ton about, but there are a couple, like they had good references from their previous teams. Like it wasn't, there wasn't like some obvious like hot shot candidate here. And when it gets down to toward the end, and like they loved Carlos Mendoza, who's on the other side of the bracket right now, still with the Mets. They loved Craig Albernaz, right? And the choice of Vogt was so interesting just because of the lack of experience. And you're going from the last time you had to hire somebody, Terry Francona, it was, let's interview Sandy Alomar because he's deserving of the job and he replaced Manny Acta the last week of the season. Let's just reach out to Terry Francona. Oh, he's interested? Okay, let's spend a day with him. Okay, we got to offer this guy the job. And then he's willing to come here? Done. It was so easy. And this time, it was such a painstaking process. And they had to decide, like, what do we value internally? And it led them to a guy with no experience. So it's crazy to think about back then. There is no way you could have the expectation that this was possible. Even if you thought that the roster was more talented than it showed last season, there's so much that's new. A new manager, Stephen Vogt, walked into that spring training complex like 8 months ago today to give his grand opening speech. And he's looking around the room and like he's had a conversation with each person. He's looked at their picture enough to be able to put a name with a face, but he doesn't know these guys at all. And then you fast forward and they've got a decisive game to either go to the ALCS or to go home. And just like what made Terry Francona so good at his job, Stephen Vogt cares about these people so much to the point where, it's funny. I was talking to his dad. His dad dropped him off at work at 7:45 a.m. on Saturday morning before like the biggest day of his year. And Vogt was calm.
Oh, hey, Steven, you forgot your lunch. You forgot come get your lunch.
Vogt was calm, and his dad is pressing him like, come on, I'm a wreck. Like, you have to be nervous, right? And Vogt's like, this is a blast. This is so much fun. This is great. And I think part of the reason he's able to feel that way is because of the bonds that he's built. Because everybody in that dugout, you see it. You know, when you're watching on TV, you see how much everybody cares about each other and like how tight-knit of a group it is. And I think that helped fight through the nerves and the stress and the anxiety that can completely consume you. Like, look, Andrew Walters, like that was a big moment for him. And I think he sort of, you know, it's understandable, but I think the moment was a little too big there. But when you have your leader, when you have the guy in charge, and Albernaz is the same way, Albernaz was like, look, I can't feel nervous like that. I can't stress. There's so many decisions we have to make. We used 8 pitchers to cover 9 innings. Like, I can't be stressing, pulling my hair out, and my non-existent hair out over every single move and decision we have to make. And I just think that steadiness, that calmness at the top trickled its way down. And I think really helped this team not feel like those big moments were too big, if that makes sense.
And we've talked about they've done a little bit of this and prepared for this moment for weeks. And really, you could say the entire regular season was a test run of how much you trusted all those guys in the bullpen, who you believe in, who you don't. And they arrived at their final roster just for this series. And they determined everybody that made that club, they're here for a reason. They are on this roster because they believe that you can help them win. And they tried that. They put everybody to the test in that Game 5. But I understand what you're saying. You feel, they feel prepared because they have so much preparation up to this moment that you're not just parachuting in, dropping in today for Game 5 and saying, what's my situation? Who's available? What am I going to do? They've been building up to this moment from the very start. And I mean, you said we don't know if we should talk about the pulling of Boyd after the second inning. What day are we going to talk about it if we don't talk about it today? But you do that because
December
you believe in the stuff.
18th.
You believe in the guys. And the crazy thing about a bullpen game, when it all goes to plan and you think about if everybody's on, it's great. You come left, you come right. You're constantly putting the pressure on the opposition and hopefully having the advantage in every at-bat you face. That's what Detroit's plan was. But the thing that's wild about a bullpen game is you're talking about, in this case, maybe 8 names where they all have to be on for themselves, or at least pretty close to it. And if one guy, kind of like Walters, is just a little bit off, that just throws a wrench into the entire thing. It's unlike, starting pitcher when they go out there, they have it or they don't. But if they have it, then you stick with him and he goes through his 5-6 innings. Then you're only talking about a handful of guys, small handful, in a normal game where they're all just doing what they're supposed to do with sort of just a typical version of themselves. But when you introduce something like this into the equation, chaos can come in a positive way, as Detroit was trying to implement, or in a negative way, where now you're in the 7th inning and you're thinking, our 8th inning guy is on the mound. He's gassed because he's already been in here for a while. I'm looking down to that bullpen and going, I've got Joey Cantillo, Gavin Williams, who hasn't pitched since the Reagan administration, and Eli Morgan. I guess we'll go with Eli for these 2 crucial outs. Maybe I can get a little bit more in the 8th inning, and hopefully I don't have to force Clase into a 6-out save, but that's on the table here. I can't bring him in the 7th inning. I have to go to Eli Morgan here. And at some point, this is the roster you put together. This is the game plan that you said is going to help you win a series, and you just have to trust them. And if they succeed, then you move on, and if they don't, then you falter, and you're home, and you're going over the game plan again and thinking, what can we take from this? What can we learn from this situation? Well, it worked out in the positive. Enough so that they moved on to the ALCS. And I want to talk about all the different individual elements and heroes of this series, but just I think appreciating just how much has to go right and how many players have to be at their best for something like that to work. We need to talk about that because it truly is incredible. Even if you're to a point where everybody's gassed, you still, in the postseason, there's no, well, I'll just try to come back and get him tomorrow. There's no tomorrow in a Game 5. It's crazy.
But I think that plays into why it's such a close group. They have to have contributions from so many different people. You know, it really is a 26-man roster. They are using every bit of it. And I think, you know, I imagine the plan was Boyd for 2 or Boyd one time through the order. You know, I think ideally it's probably three innings, but 2. And then I think they probably felt like we can scrap together 7 innings with our 4 horsemen. Obviously, like Gaddis didn't have his best stuff. You know, Cade, I think, finished 1 batter short of what he would have really liked to do. So you knew that there was potentially going to be a need to use Sabrowski against a lefty to finish an inning or something like that. You probably didn't draw it up where you would need Sabrowski and Walters and Eli Morgan, but I mean that's the risk, right? Like we were talking about should they just start Cade Smith, but then you think about how are you going to piece together 9 innings, and you're going to need some bulk from Boyd or Williams, or you're going to have to use all those relievers. So, I mean, it worked. It's a good thing Lane Thomas's grand slam got over the bleachers and wasn't just like a 2-run double off the wall, or conversations might be a little different. But, I mean, it's just think. I was talking to a coach before the game, and he was saying how crazy, like he was playing our game. He was saying how crazy it is. Like, if you would have told him in February some of the lineups they'd be trotting out there in the middle of the season, where you have like Angel Martinez hitting first and Schneemann second, and you know when Kwan was out, and they were just cycling guys in and out. You know, I added, well, how about the fact that Shane Bieber would make 2 starts and wouldn't be part of this, and even he was saying like, yeah, like if you had me predict the record, I don't think I would have said that we were sitting in first place with one of the best records in baseball. And then you think about just like Rocchio's emergence, and you think about some of the pitchers. Like Eric Sabrowski got some big outs, and this is a guy who was not on your team. He didn't debut until September, and it's just like you don't know at the moment when Sabrowski's debuting and he's like in a pickle for the first time in the majors and he gets out of it. Like what that's going to mean. You're not thinking, ooh, 6 weeks from now, he's going to have to be in pitching in a win or go home game and get key outs. So that's kind of what this team has been about. Is they've had these guys get some experience during the season, be part of a winner, and then the moment maybe just doesn't feel overwhelming. I mean, it depends who you ask. Sabrowski exited the game and then literally clocked like 20,000 steps pacing around Progressive Field in the late innings. So,
just like the rest of us, be a good time to have a standing room only ticket. Let's talk about that grand slam. What a moment. I want to talk just about where it lands in postseason lore for the Guardians, but watching on television, the reactions of that ballpark, I've went back and watched those highlights thousands of times. Not because I want to see the grand slam, but because I just want to look in the crowd and just see the reactions and see the joy, jubilation you feel in that moment. See the people embrace him once he gets back to the dugout, and just the level of euphoria that everyone feels in that moment. Having witnessed it right there, you're seeing it all from a bird's eye view. Take us through the moment he connects to the moment he disappears into that dugout.
Okay, so it is the first time in my life, certainly my career, where my jaw has literally dropped. That was my reaction. I'm sitting there mouth wide open because you think about, first of all, when they changed Stephen Kwan's leadoff reaching on an error to a single, I remember saying out loud, well, won't be a no-hitter. Like, that's how good Skubal looked the first few innings. I mean, that
They
guy,
joked on the broadcast the exact same thing.
that guy, his stuff is insane. And so that inning, it felt like, okay, typical Guards baseball where you get a couple singles by the guys who just, well, it was Jimenez. Jimenez, who Stephen Vogt had pulled him aside during the workout the day before Game 5 and said, look, you've been in this moment before. You've been a good hitter before. We know what you can do. Just take a deep breath. Relax. No pressure. And then Jimenez has a good game, and you think, oh my God, Stephen Vogt is a soothsayer. Like, what a guru. But, you know, they load the bases. Like, that fry squib was hilarious. And the place is going nuts. And then, you know, they see Jose Ramirez strutting to the plate, and they're going insane. They're chanting his name louder than I've ever heard them chant his name. And it was a really cool moment. It was an amazing atmosphere. I was a little nervous about that, shifting the game to 1 o'clock, but the fans delivered. It didn't diminish the moment. So Jose's at the plate. I'm thinking, like, this is baseball. This is what you want. You've got the best pitcher in the world facing one of the best hitters in the world. Like, a moment Jose craves, a moment Skubal craves. The bases are loaded. There's one out. It's a 1-0 game. Like, there's nowhere to put them. Like, this is why we do this. This is why we watch. This is why we sit through those miserable games in April and May and just hoping for the payoff that comes in a situation like this. And then it gets hit by a pitch. 99.9 miles an hour in the hand. So the fans are all cheering, yeah. And then they realize Jose, because the score's tied, and then Jose like hunches over holding his hand, and that immediately shifts to a boo. And so like the shift in tenor there to then Jose shaking off his hand and jogging to first, and then again it's yeah. And it's like this weird, awkward, it was like everyone was reassessing the situation. Like, in their minds, they're standing there in the ballpark, and they're like, okay, so this means bases are still loaded. Now it's a tie game, 1 out. Who's coming out? Oh, it's Lane Thomas. Okay. And before you could even process all that, he hits it into the bleachers. First pitch. And I don't know where it ranks. It's hard. The Rajay one feels like it can never be topped unless it's like a walk-off in the World Series. But I also like the number of Cubs fans there makes that one weird. I don't know. I asked, Rajay is everywhere I can't not see him. I walk into a hallway, he's there. I'm on the field, he's there. He's been everywhere I've looked for the last 10 days. So I asked him. I think he's sticking with his as like the loudest scene he's ever
I'm shocked.
been a part of. He did bring up a good point in just how as a series goes on and you're facing the same pitchers over and over, and maybe it doesn't apply to like Cade Smith, but just he said, he's like, if you're Lane Thomas, like you probably bankrolled all of that knowledge you've gained facing Skubal in this series already, and you're sitting there on that first pitch just ready to pounce like he was against Chapman. Obviously that wasn't the first pitch, but he had faced him twice before and kind of knew what to expect at that point. But just the development of emotions from the crowd, I mean, that was insane. It was such an awesome atmosphere.
I don't think I've had a more, as you said, it was the open mouth reaction to a home run since that Rajay one. It was there in my brain, my reaction, my shock of the moment and just what it meant. I think they're on par. Now, we can debate. One is in the World Series. One's in Game 7 of the World Series. One is when you're down compared to when you're tied. And so there are a lot of things here at play. One is happening in the 8th inning compared to the 5th inning. The reality here is kind of what they do from here will help determine some of where this lives. where it falls, which one is more important really doesn't matter. It's just more fun for us to debate. But I think it's just something that's going to happen over time. We can try. It's kind of like a nickname. You can't give yourself a nickname. Other people have to give it to you. And for this, is it more impressive than the Rajay one? Does it matter? I don't know. We just time will tell. But it is up there. It is one of the most impressive, improbable, spectacular postseason home runs for this club in its history. And it's funny that it comes the day after David Fry also hit one of those. You get back-to-back games of some of the most impressive postseason homers this club has ever smacked. And I was watching the ballpark feed. This is the closest I could get to actually being there. MLB Network has the one that's always in center field that they can always drop in at any time. And so they put that out on Twitter. And the best part about this home run is that you hear the crack of the bat and then this wall of noise. And then it's almost like someone is riding the fader, and you could hear like the crowd come down, because instantly when the ball is hit, everyone jumps out of their seat. You think this has got a chance. It's ticketed for the outfield. You lose it. And then everybody calms. You get the volume comes down a little bit, just everyone in anticipation, seeing the ball in the air. You can't see the ball go over the fence, courtesy of this angle, but you know when it does, because that wall of sound then doubles, and from the initial wall of sound. It is one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and then you see him round the bases, and I love that angle because you get to see everybody on the field. We're obviously looking at Lane Thomas. We're obviously looking at the dugout, but I also, at what point does Scooble know? What is his instant reaction? What is the reaction of the infielders from Detroit? This is a game where you've set this up. You took the lead. You think our ace is on the mound. He looks fantastic. There's no shot. Now you're down by 4 runs. The swing of emotion that happens in that moment from both clubs is what helps this live on forever. The things you'll go, hey, you remember that grand slam? Oh, I couldn't take my eyes off of this, and everyone will have a different perspective of it. It is why this game is awesome. It sucks sometimes, too, when you're on the other end of this. But it is something that brings us all together, and you will never forget.
Yeah, the Rajay one, I remember just freezing and thinking about how, because it was so late in the game, the story I was writing, could it still work if they won? I remember Tyler Naquin's...
You're so selfish. I did all this work. I wanted to get out there.
Tyler Naquin's walk-off inside the park home run was the first time I ever froze and had no idea what to do. I had a game story due 10 seconds after that happened and wasn't sure how to put it together. The Lindor Grand Slam, I remember saying, wow. Kind of like Dennis Eckersley back in the day. And then, yeah, this one was... I think the David Fry one I said wow too, because as we talked about, just that awesome snapshot of like the road team going nuts and everyone in the ballpark can hear them going nuts because it's so silent. And then this one, I mean, the jaw was dropped just because of the sequence of events that led to it. And then you think back to the trade and the struggles he had, and he kind of had to talk himself back into the lineup in September and prove that he deserved to play against right-handed pitching. And then what did we talk about this week? Throughout the week, we said the Tigers they're going to try to win every matchup. They're going to try to have the platoon advantage as much as they can. It is going to be imperative that second tier of hitters, the Frys, the Thomases, the Manzardos, deliver in the situations where they are the platoon killers or whatever. And Fry did it in Game 4. And Lane Thomas did it in Game 1 and Game 5. And those are the 3 biggest swings of the series from Cleveland's standpoint. And, it's interesting, too. They couldn't do this 2 years ago. I mean, it was 3 home runs that really swung this series. And 2 years ago, like, you would have loaded the bases and here's SpongeBob SquarePants. And I don't know that he's hitting a grand slam. I mean, I know he hit the walk-off against the Rays. But, are you how many runs are you hoping to score there? Or here's Gabriel Arias. You're praying you can get a sac fly out of that and just tie the game or take the lead against Skubal. So, I it's a different team. It's a more threatening lineup, and you see how important power is in the playoffs. And they didn't have that until this year.
Yeah. I mean, even the threat, every time John Kensey Noel came to the plate, I know he had a tough series. At least he was still making contact. He was still somewhat threatening. It wasn't quite as bad as it was at the end of September. But he's in there for a lot of the time because in the postseason, all it takes is one. One mistake, one swing, and he could be there to be the man that does it. In this case, it was David Fry, it was Lane Thomas, it was those guys that were the supporting cast that, as we talked about, and you just said, we're going to have to show up in this series. Yes, your stars can take over, and moving on to the ALCS, Jose, he was pitched around some in this Detroit series. They did a pretty good job outside of the one home run of keeping him at bay. He's got to show up more in the ALCS, I would think, for this club to move on. And I'm not going to expect that always the supporting cast is going to be there, but it's a lot easier when you get a little bit of both. A little bit of both. That sequence, it did happen so quickly, where you're having Jimenez single to start the inning. I was wondering if Rocchio would lay down a bunt, but just with the way he swung the bat, and I want to talk more about him, so let's table that for a second. I thought maybe they would lay down a bunt because I'm thinking with Kwan as on fire as this guy's been, don't you want him with a runner in scoring position? But they opt to just let the guy that's been pretty hot with the bat swing. He strikes out. And so you're like, God, was that just the one? Here comes Kwan where he's going to hit the base hit, but then that's going to be it. And you might have had a chance with a runner at second base with Kwan there, but because he wasn't, and that single, you're not going to get anything out of it. I think we just seen that play out so many times. That's Squibber. Someone in our live stream said that was the unappreciated moment of the game, that Squibber off the bat of Fry to load the bases, because at that point, if it's 2 outs with a couple of runners on base, what are they going to do with Jose? Probably not pitch to him, right? Now, maybe you still get to the same moment with Lane Thomas, but how you get here is important. I thought the TBS postgame crew did a great job of highlighting this. And it's not often we say that about a post-game crew, but I thought they did. Rollins and Pedro and Curtis Granderson and Dusty Baker. I thought they made a good point that it's not just the fact that here comes Lane Thomas, but it's everything that leads up to it, because then you have the hit by pitch. And so now the game is tied. And not only is Skubal thinking about, okay, I don't want to let this get any worse, but also there's this long period where Jose is being tended to. You're curious if he's going to be okay. Lane Thomas is, instead of strolling to the plate going, oh my God, here's this giant moment, he's thinking, I hope Jose's okay. Oh yeah, I got to get in here for an at-bat. It takes just a brief, small amount of pressure off his brain, off of himself for a moment, where he could think about something else other than this at-bat, and then he could lock back in. But what happens when you have this long delay, and this is what they talked about on the broadcast, what do you think the pitcher's going to do? After this long delay, do you think he's going to try to rip off a breaking pitch or change up or something? He's going to want to get ahead here in this situation. Next time, sure. And Lane Thomas, this is the immovable object against the whatever it is. It's Hogan versus Andre the Giant here. Because Lane Thomas is going to also want to ambush that pitch. He's shown that he wants to do it in this series. He already did it in Game 1, a 3-run home run. So does the same thing play out in any other way? Do you get the same result if anything else happens along the way to sort of derail it? It had to take that Jose getting hit by a pitch. It had to take that delay. It had to take that brief amount of time for Lane Thomas to think about it and then get locked back in. And then it had to take Skubal thinking, oh my gosh, I just let this tying run score. I hit a guy with a pitch. I need to focus more on getting this in the zone. And Lane Thomas goes, I'm ready for it. It's an incredible, it's what drives you crazy when you're on the losing end, and you absolutely love and talk about it for the rest of your life when you're on the winning end.
Yeah, and I just think there's, it used to be death by 1,000 paper cuts, but sometimes you You can't do that in the playoffs. It's got to be like death by 500 paper cuts and then just a machete. I don't know. Like you need to be able to deliver that big blow, whether it's a 2-3 run double to the gap or Thomas putting it over the fence. And I think that's the difference. That's why this team is more formidable now than it was 2 years ago. But yeah, I mean, it's like I've written about it a lot the last few days. We've talked about it plenty, but like we've gotten such a good glimpse. And I don't think we got this in 2016 until the very end. And I know there's been this debate in the Discord and on our podcast about like, oh, well, if you're fans, you just want to win a World Series. You don't care. You can blow out everybody for 11 games. Like, that's fine. And I'm sitting here romanticizing everything, saying, no, the drama's great, blah, blah. But this is what's normal. Like, you don't steamroll your way to a World Series usually. You have to go through stressful moments like this where you think it's over and then it's, oh, we're back. And it's the beauty of sports. You love and hate it simultaneously. You love to hate it, you hate to love it. And the pain, that pain that you were experiencing the first 4.5 innings, like felt so good after that. You know what I mean? And you just feel like everything you've been through is justified. All the stress you felt, all the pacing around your living room, all the, swigs of Jack Daniels you had to take to try to get in the right mindset to sit through another 9 innings. Like it's all
Pepto.
worthwhile in the end when your team does it. And if your team doesn't do it, then, well, you just sit there and count the days until spring training.
Yeah, you go back to everything that happened. You lament every move made or not made, and that's the crazy thing. It's not even a move made or not made. It's just how it played out. You can't change how it played out. It's just how you get there. One small little thing is changed, and the entire outcome is changed. It's what, again, drives you crazy when you're in this position and you lose. And you go back and you think, well, what if Tito didn't pull Coco Crisp out and put Michael Martinez in? Or you talk about this for the rest of your life. Or, in the positive, you talk about it for the rest of your life, but you do it with a smile on your face. Now, if I would have started this series and asked you to rank 2 things,
can I just,
which is more improbable?
Look, let me just jump in really quick. Because I was just...
Sure, go ahead.
The Cavs title in 16, if they swept the Warriors, you'd talk about it. It'd be still the best thing that you've ever witnessed, and you'd be thrilled, and you'd remember that year forever. There's no doubt. But the way it unfolded makes it such a more compelling story to tell and gives you fonder memories. You know, that flirtation with disaster is just more special in the end when you pull it out. That's all. I'm not wishing shorter lifespans on our listeners, but I just think...
No, how they're going to pay for the Patreon if they...
You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, we talked about it after that happened, just you and I, in the press box, that Cavs championship, that I love that everyone had a moment of redemption. I think Shumpert had a moment where he took over offensively. J.R. Smith drained a huge 3. Kevin Love played terrific defense. It was like the things that people were getting criticized for, they all came up with a huge moment. And that's a perfect segue, actually, so I won't rip you too much for derailing us for a moment into this next man that I want to talk about. But the way I wanted to set it up, before the series, I tell you, here are 2 things that could happen. You tell me which is more improbable. 1, a grand slam by Lane Thomas off a Tarek Skubal to help you win the game. 2, the stadium at one point in this series will be chanting Brian Rocchio's name.
Yeah, I never would have guessed too. There were a lot of chants. I heard an I Believe in Stephen Vogt chant. I heard an F you Skubal chant. I heard F the Yankees. The Rocchio one. Very impressive. And you wonder, because development's not linear and you never know when a young player... I mean, confidence is everything. And doesn't he look? He exudes confidence right now. You can tell he expects to get on base when he's up there. If he doesn't, he's frustrated. And even like delivering that insurance run in the 8th inning there, and you see him round first base, and he is so fired up. Like, that is a guy oozing confidence, and it's fueling his play. And he credits last winter when he played for Tiburones de La Guaira in his native Venezuela, and they won the winter ball title. And he said that experience was really helpful, being in those pressure-packed moments. He crushed the ball too. He had 1,000 OPS. And like he said, because of that, this moment isn't too intimidating. And the way it's crazy, but like their best path to scoring runs right now is getting to the bottom of the order so that Rocchio can get on base ahead of Kwan. It's been really impressive, and like, it's good for him too, because I thought his season had a lot of meh in it. I know the team really likes him, but this has to give him confidence and them confidence going into next year, no matter what happens next.
Doesn't it feel like he's taking the offensive thing? Usually you say, don't take your offense with you to the field. But it's almost like Rocchio's taking the offense with him to the field and using it in a positive, making these great plays. Whether it was the one where he had to bounce the throw over to first base, whether it was the leaping grab that TBS decided, that's enough, let's go to a commercial in the middle of the game. And then he's taking that back to the offense, and that's helping him come through there. And it's just like he's becoming a better version of himself. I said on the live stream, the playoffs will make you grow up. Either you do it or you don't, but it'll force you to grow up in a hurry. And I think we're seeing a little bit of him growing up. And maybe it's just the hair. Maybe it was taking the advice of Jared Wright, Charlie Nagy, Richie Sexson, and going full blonde.
God, why did Nagy think he could pull that off? I mean, Rocchio's 23. There's still growth to be had. And I think, you see there are players too, like, who they just need something like this, and then they're just a completely different player. I mean, he's probably sitting there thinking, like, why am I struggling to hit against pitchers I face all the time in June when there are no stakes and I don't have a rapid heartbeat? If I can do this, I should be able to do that. So sometimes it's just proving to yourself that you can do it, and you don't know you can do it until you do it. And now it looks like he expects to do it every single time he has a chance to do it. So, yeah, I it's really impressive. Him paired with Kwan looking like the Kwan we were talking about flirting with 400 is quite a nice combination ahead of the middle of the order.
I mean, didn't we talk about that we wanted Kwan? Yes, the power and the doubles and all that stuff was great. We all love that he became more of a full version of himself in that first half. But the thing that really he needed to be in this postseason was the absolute pest that we know he can be. And how many curse words do you think Detroit pitchers said whenever they looked over and they saw Kwan coming to the plate? Not because he was going to hit a go-ahead home run, but because you knew this was going to be one of the toughest at-bats of the game. He's going to take something out of me physically, even if I get him out, which didn't happen much in this series. But there's a good chance, it feels like 75% chance that he's going to be on first base by the time this at-bat is over, and it was probably going to be a tough at-bat to get there, and he's going to foul off some good pitches, and he's just going to knock the line drive over the shortstop's head, and my God, he's on first base again. So it's a 10-game hit streak for him, tying Kenny Lofton, and it was 3 consecutive 3-hit games. This guy just was constantly on base. Paired with Rocchio, the scoring chances were always there for that second, third, and fourth hitter in this lineup. I won't say it's an unsung part of this because I think we all recognize just how good Kwan was, but it was a massive thing to happen for this offense to be any sort of legitimate certainly in the first game, then in the game 5 too, to be able to break out offensively.
The 3 most important innings of the series for Cleveland. Top of the first in game 1, Kwan scored. Top of the 7th, or bottom of the first in game 1. Top of the 7th of game 4, Kwan scored on the Fry home run. Bottom of the 5th in game 5, Kwan scored on Thomas's home run. So he is the catalyst. He is the guy who gives you chances to score. 11 for 21 in the series and walked twice, struck out only 3 times. That's the guy. Sign him. It's going to cost you a lot more than what of a couple of years ago.
Do you think that time away before the end of the season was beneficial at all mentally? Physically, we knew he needed the time off. But do you think for a guy that we sort of agreed a lot of this has to be mental, that it was just beneficial to get a chance to breathe when the season had gotten out of control?
Because even if you have an off day in the schedule during the season, it's forced. You tell yourself, like, okay, this is the off day that they've given me. I need to just exhale and relax. But then you're back at the ballpark the next day going through the same motions. When you have 10-ish, it would end up being 11 or 12 days off on the injured list, then you play a few games, and then you have another week where it's, practicing more than actually playing. Like, you don't have a choice. Like, you have to just reset. And I do think he needed that. I mean, remember, it was right when he came off the injured list. There was no easing back into it. That's when he was scorching hot and got his average up to 400 back in June. So, I think it's, one off day is not going to solve everything. It's just going to give maybe your body a physical break for a day, but your mind it's not enough time to reset. So he had parts of 3 weeks here where he could do that. I do think that is helpful.
You knew he was going to have to come up big, and as we talked about, we sort of knew that some of the supporting cast was going to have to do that too. But then there's a third tier. The guys that you never thought would play a role at any point in the series, deciding where you're going to get. You go to the bullpen in the 3rd inning, there's a good chance that might happen, and you're going to live and die at some point with somebody who's not part of the Big Four. Sobrowski made a big pitch early. That was a huge part of the game. Another man that came out of that bullpen that gave them those outs was Eli Morgan. Before the series began, we talked about who in that bullpen do you not trust? And you said the closest thing to that was Eli Morgan. Now, his stats at the beginning of this series, if you're just looking at the end of the regular season, were fantastic. But as I talked about on the broadcast, how often did he appear in games where there was high leverage? Not very often. I think they said there might have been 2 games where he appeared where they had the lead, or it was close. I don't remember what the stat was. But we all know he's mostly in there when they're behind or everybody else has pitched 3 days in a row. And he's a solid pitcher, but he's not as high as everybody else on this list. He doesn't have the stuff that everyone else does. But when you get to the 7th inning, Hunter Gaddis has already been forced in earlier because everybody's 1 out less than Stephen Vogt would have liked. Everyone is running out of gas. One more batter before you really would have drew it up. And that's the risk you run. So you get to the 7th inning, Gaddis is in there, you get the strikeout of Veerling, but then Green singles, and then you get the Colt Keith double, and now Detroit is a run closer. They're within 2 runs. Gaddis has got nothing left. He's been relying on heavily here. He's into the 30s in pitches. You're going to have to go to that bullpen. And Stephen Vogt opts to go with Eli Morgan, who comes in and faces Perez, strikes him out, gets Torkelson, strikes him out.
Torkelson looked like he had never seen a changeup before. Or at least a changeup like that.
And you get the called changeup. A couple of comeback changeups in this series proved very crucial. One by Eli, a couple by Gaddis. But 2 of the biggest outs that Eli Morgan will ever get in his career. Incredible.
And that's what I mean. I mean, you think back to the regular season, Eli had some injuries. I think he was a little unhappy that sometimes he was that guy who just had to go to AAA because somebody had to, and he had options. And there he is, in a key situation, like the biggest moment of his life. And you're right, Sobrowski. I mean, Sobrowski had 2 Tommy John surgeries. The guy barely pitched from the time the Padres drafted him in 2018 until basically last season. Lost a couple seasons to Tommy John, the 2020 COVID year. Guy had barely pitched. Guardians saw something they liked, grabbed him in the minor league phase of the Rule 5, was pitching decent this year, gets hit in the back of the head with a throw down to second base, suffered a concussion, and his reaction was like, oh, add it to the pile, another inconvenient setback. And he's up here and just looks like a 7-year veteran with great stuff. It's incredible. Again, you think you know everything about a team and how things are going to play out at the beginning of the year, and then you get to the playoffs and it's like, Shane Bieber, no, actually it's going to be Eric Sobrowski. You're like, who? How many games did they lose? But that's the way this is. It's crazy.
Sobrowski, he's one of those guys that doesn't have a 97-mile-per-hour fastball, but based on the swings, some of them, they make it look like that. You don't know if it's the extension, which he gets good extension. You don't know if it's just the ride, the movement on the four-seamer, whatever it is. We both agree that this is a man that should be on the playoff roster. And I felt the same thing about Walters, too. I know he struggles with command, but you even saw in the outing, the stuff is great. It's just, This is the one day I couldn't find it, and it's the playoffs, and so all of a sudden the pressure is building, and I couldn't get it reeled back in time. You have to go get saved. But it doesn't, to me, take off the table ever needing to use him again. That's a guy with elite stuff that I think will play in the postseason, and he'll probably be better for having gone through whatever he did. The team didn't lose. It's okay. We're going to trust you again. We're going to need you at some point again.
Yeah, there's potentially 14 more games remaining.
Oh, my God. How are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? Well, those outs by Eli were critical because you were going to go to Clase in the 7th. The vote was already, I think, nervous about making him go to 6 outs. And that's why Eli comes. You're trying to steal an out in the 8th inning. If Eli can get even one, you're like, okay, then now it's only 5. Every out, when you're getting to the end, feels extremely huge. But unfortunately, you do have to go to Clase. Fortunately, he looked like a man that was possessed by whatever the Tigers did to him earlier in the series and said, we're not going to play that game anymore. And it was evident. I don't know if it was Carpenter specifically, if it was just being mad at the Tigers that they got to him in game 2, but he stares down Carpenter, stares down the Tigers after he strikes him out. And did you notice what happened in that plate appearance? How many sliders did you see in that sequence?
Oh, I assume 0.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, I mean, he wants that moment. And that's what I appreciate about him. I know it's what Stephen Vogt appreciates about him. Just that he always wants to be the one pitching. Yeah, I know he was shaky in the series, at least in 2 of the outings. I don't worry about him. And I have no qualms about asking him to get 5, 6 outs.
I know you didn't see in the dugout. You can't see unless you're sitting there watching the broadcast. After the 8th inning, they added an extra run here. Feels like extreme insurance. The best kind. 4-run lead. Clase is coming back out for the 9th inning. And so they go to the dugout. And they had been showing him briefly throughout the bottom of the 8th inning, just sitting there, very calm, stoic, statuesque. And I'm wondering, okay, being under control of your emotions is huge for a closer, but closers are also, they're the closest thing to a football player that exists in baseball. where football's the mentality. The coach is firing you up. You don't see the manager before the first pitch going, all right, guys, we're going to come back. And everyone runs out of the dugout because by the bottom of the second inning, everyone's out of energy if you're playing that way. But for a closer, the door has to open like you did in the eighth. You got to hit the Wild Thing music. He's got to stroll out. There has to be an aura about them, and they've got to come out with that energy. Well, I think part of the challenge for a closer is then you got to reel that back in. You're on the bench, and then you come back out for the next inning. How can you bottle all that up and then funnel it back out at the opposing team? So he's sitting there. This is perhaps what makes Austin Hedges as great as he is. He's sitting there, and all of a sudden Hedges enters the frame, and he about punches him in the chest. He just goes up to him and starts screaming at him and just shoves him in the chest as hard as he can. I don't know if that was beneficial. He obviously, Hedges knows his pitchers better than I ever could watching at home. But Hedges come in and he's just like, no, let's go, big boy. Shoves him in the chest, and then Clase's like, all right. And he gets up and he heads back out for that inning. Thought that was an incredible moment. It's just like knowing you have to know your teammates. Certainly coaches and managers have to know their players, but how do you get them to respond in that moment? Well, whatever Hedges thought needed to happen, it worked because you just went whoop, 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 and you were done.
Yeah. Did you see when Hedges yanked one foul in his at-bat and Jose is in his typical spot, like top dugout step, and yeah, Jose's saying, "Can you keep it fair, please? Can you not almost hit me?" This is a team that, again, like the language barriers don't matter. There's so much camaraderie. It's such a tight-knit group. I know that's all cliche. I know every team says that, even if they're not a winning team, they say like, "Oh, well, we've got great chemistry," blah blah. But like, there really is. There's like a mojo in that dugout or in that clubhouse where, I mean, the way that they have welcomed Lane Thomas, and they're, even, I think the Rocky Top story is out there plenty by now. We've talked about it. I've written about it for weeks, but Lane Thomas is from Tennessee, and to make him feel welcome when he got traded to Cleveland, Ben Lively tossed Rocky Top, which is the Tennessee fight song, on to the team's victory playlist. And so it's the second song on that playlist now, and they all dance like crazy to honor Lane Thomas, to make him feel welcome. And then, as the season went on, as they start clinching, like that song would come on as they're spraying each other in champagne after they won the division, and they're going nuts. And even Clase is dancing like a maniac to a song that he has no idea what, like the history of Tennessee theme songs are. So Lane Thomas hits that grand slam. He gets back to the dugout, and I saw Austin Hedges is like standing on one of the benches in the dugout, turns to Thomas and starts dancing, like swinging his elbows back and forth to say, like, that song, we're 4 innings away from hearing that song. And then in the clubhouse celebration after the game, Lively and Hedges were like searching the room frantically as if they had lost a puppy. And they were just trying to find the iPad so they could put Rocky Top on, because Hedges is holding the belt. He wants to award it to Lane Thomas, but he wants to wait till Rocky Top is playing before he does it. And it was just, it's like, I don't know. It's a really close group. And I think you see it in moments like that too, where they can have conversations on the field, fire each other up. Like, nothing's fake. Everything is real because everybody has bonds and relationships that they've built over the course of the last year or more.
We'll see how that plays out in the ALCS. The MLB postseason, I was thinking about this just as the show began. We can save nothing for that. And we'll talk about that next week, because here comes game 1, because you played game 5. And so instantly we're right back into it. But as we wrap things up, I was wondering, this is a team that relied heavily on the bullpen in a short series. They knew they could do that because there were off days galore, because you had this layoff between the final regular season game and the starting of the playoffs. And you don't have to win 4. You only had to win 3. So you can be aggressive with your pitching if you're Stephen Vogt. We saw with Detroit, I felt like their pitchers were nearing the end of their ability to be as dominant as A.J. Hinch would have liked. Because they had to do it in the wild card round. Then they had to do it in the 5-game series, and you're going to a full 5 games. I'm looking ahead to that ALCS and wondering, can you be as aggressive? Can you pull a Boyd out in the second inning of this series? I mean, you could if you're really selling out to win a game, and maybe by the end of this series, you're thinking that way. But I think you got to maintain a little bit more of a bigger picture view in this series. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. You're going to need someone to throw 6 innings at some point, right? Maybe in that middle third, too. You've got 2 on the road, 3 at home, 2 on the road. It's going to be interesting. Like, you need Cobb to give you a little length if he's the game 1 starter, or Williams, or whoever it is. And then I assume Bybee in game 2, you could probably lean on him a little more, give him a little bit longer of a leash than you had in the division series. That was part of the benefit here. Cade Smith and Tim Herron pitched in all 5 games. The first Cleveland pitchers to ever do that in a division series. And it was because of the way the schedule was structured. Not as forgiving in the ALCS. So, do you add a pitcher to the roster? You're certainly going to need another starter. I think you need 4. So it'll be interesting. It's a lot to sift through.
If you're hearing
Not
this
much
sounder,
time.
it means Zack has ridiculously asked for TJ to give him his 3 starters
I guess,
if the
yeah.
playoffs started
4.
today.
Give me 4.
We're going to need a 4th one. Yeah, who's it going to be?
We're going to need a bigger boat.
You add Lively back to the roster? He's on more than just iPad duty? What do you do? Those questions will be answered momentarily, depending
By
on when you
Aaron
listen
Judge
to
and
this.
Juan Soto.
This was a fun series. I would love to say that no matter what happens after this was fun. This was the reality here of being a human being is you want more. This was great. I loved it. Relish every moment of it. But now you're on to the ALCS and you're one step closer to the World Series.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was hell. Let's do it again.
Had a Yankee fan tweet at me. I don't know if they're a Yankee fan, but they said, great, another bye for the Yankees in my mentions.
Wow.
We'll see.
Bold.
We'll see.